Kelvin had a talent for turning serious conversations into comedy skits. Not the kind that made people laugh because it was funny, more like the kind that made you laugh because if you didn't, you'd start screaming. In their home in Lagos, he moved like a man who believed marriage was a trophy, not a covenant. Shoulders high, voice louder than necessary. Phone always face down as if it was shy. Rosemary, on the other hand, had the quietness of deep water, calm on top, heavy underneath. For months, she watched patterns form like harmattan dust, a late meeting, a networking dinner, a business trip, that came with a new perfume clinging to his shirt like a guilty signature. She didn't shout. She didn't throw plates. She didn't do the dramatic movie thing. She just spoke, softly, clearly, like someone reading a warning label before you drink poison. The first time she warned him, it was on a Tuesday evening when the generator was humming and the ceiling fan was doing its best. Kelvin was texting with a grin that looked too private. Rosemary served his food, sat opposite him, and said, "Kelvin, I'm not blind. I'm just quiet." He chuckled as if she told a joke and replied, "My love, you worry too much. It's only work." Rosemary nodded slowly. The way you nod at a child insisting a lion is a house cat. "Okay," she said, "but hear me. I won't compete with women you bring into my marriage." Kelvin waved his hand like a politician dismissing a reporter. "Compete? Who is competing with you? You're my wife." His tone was sweet, but it carried the lazy confidence of a man who thought titles were enough to cover sins. Rosemary's lips curved, not a smile, not anger, something in between. "Kelvin," she continued, "one day I'll respond. Not with noise, with action." Kelvin laughed again, a loud one, the kind that filled the room and tried to intimidate silence into surrender. After that, her warnings became a rhythm, never frequent enough to nag, never quiet enough to be mistaken. Sometimes she said it while folding laundry, her hand steady, her eyes on the shirts like she was ironing out lies. Sometimes she said it while they drove, Lagos traffic trapping them together, horns blaring as if the city itself was protesting his behavior. "This lifestyle," she would say, "will end in disgrace." Kelvin would shake his head, grin, and turn it into humor. "So you become prophetess now? Should I bring offering?" Rosemary would respond with a tiny sigh that sounded like a door closing gently. In truth, she was not trying to win an argument. She was trying to save a man who thought consequences were only for other people, the kind that appear in other men's stories, not his. But Kelvin had confused Rosemary's calmness for fear. He didn't realize he was watching patience, ancient, disciplined patience, gather itself like a storm that refuses to announce its arrival. The week Kelvin decided to travel, he packed the way some people propose marriage, dramatically, loudly, with unnecessary performance. He didn't just fold clothes. He flung them into the suitcase like he was casting spells. He paced the bedroom with his phone pressed to his ear, laughing too hard at jokes that didn't sound funny, speaking in that playful tone men use when they're trying to impress women who don't know their real character yet. "Dubai will be mad," he said, and the way he dragged the word mad sounded like a promise. He stood near the wardrobe, half facing the mirror, half facing the door, making sure the sound traveled to the living room where Rosemary sat. It wasn't accidental. Kelvin wanted an audience. If Rosemary cried, he could call her dramatic. If she begged, he could call her insecure. If she shouted, he could call her crazy. Either way, he would feel powerful, because some men mistake control for love and applause for respect. Rosemary moved through the house like a woman who had already made a decision, but hadn't announced it yet. She cooked dinner, washed plates, and cleaned surfaces, not with the nervous energy of someone pretending everything is fine, but with the calm precision of someone closing chapters. Kelvin expected tears. Instead, he got silence and small normalities. That unsettled him more than anger would have. He walked into the living room, dragging his suitcase behind him, the wheels clicking like a countdown. "So you're not asking where I'm going?" he teased, leaning on the handle. Rosemary looked up, her eyes steady. "You're going where you've already chosen to go," she said. Kelvin blinked, then laughed, forcing it. "Ah, you're forming strong woman now." Rosemary's gaze didn't change. "I have always been strong," she replied softly. "I was just using my strength to hold us together." Now I'll use it to hold myself. Later that night, Kelvin sat on the bed scrolling through his phone, smiling at a message that made him tilt his head like a boy with a crush. Rosemary entered the room with a folded shirt, his favorite one, ironed neatly. She placed it on the bed as if she was placing a final piece in a coffin, then sat on the edge of the mattress. "Kelvin," she said, "I'm giving you one last warning." Kelvin didn't look up immediately. Warning again," he chuckled. "Rosemary, please don't start." She waited until he finally looked at her. "If you travel with those women," she continued, "don't come back expecting the same life you left behind." Kelvin rolled his eyes, but inside him something shifted, like a candle flickering in a sudden breeze. He covered it with arrogance. "What will you do? You'll cry, you'll shout, then you'll forgive," he said confidently. Rosemary's lips lifted into a small, almost pitying smile. "You keep talking about my tears," she murmured. "Kelvin, you have never asked yourself what my silence means." On the morning Kelvin left, the sky was dull with early haze, and the street outside their estate was already awake with the usual Lagos soundtrack. Hawkers calling, engines coughing, distant horns arguing with each other. Kelvin dressed like a man going to receive an award, clean shirt, sharp cologne, a watch that gleamed like pride. He expected Rosemary to hover around him, anxious, asking questions she already knew the answers to. He expected the dramatic pause by the door. Maybe even the classic line, "If you walk out, don't come back." Kelvin liked that line because it made him feel like the main character. But Rosemary didn't give him a script. She gave him reality, and reality is often quiet. So quiet, arrogant people don't hear it until it's too late. Rosemary stood in the kitchen stirring tea, the spoon clinking gently against the cup. Kelvin dragged his suitcase toward the front door and cleared his throat loudly, as if reminding her that he existed. "I'm leaving," he announced. Rosemary turned, wiped her hands, and walked toward him. For a second, Kelvin's chest lifted. This was it. The tears were loading. The begging was buffering. But Rosemary simply adjusted the collar of his shirt like she was doing it for the last time, then looked into his eyes. "Safe journey, Kelvin," she said, voice calm. "Enjoy your trip." The words landed oddly. No fear. No anger. Just a gentle farewell, the kind you give someone you've already released in your heart. Kelvin frowned. "That's all?" he asked. Rosemary tilted her head slightly. "Is there more you want?" she replied. Her tone had a faint humor, like a mother watching a stubborn child demand special effects. Kelvin scoffed. "You're pretending to be strong," he muttered. Rosemary's face didn't change. "I'm not pretending," she said. "I'm practicing peace." At the gate, Kelvin paused and glanced back at the house, waiting for Rosemary to run out calling his name, like in those Nollywood scenes where the man turns around and realizes the woman still loves him. But nobody ran out. No voice called. No door flung open. Only the quiet of a woman who had finally stopped chasing. Kelvin climbed into the car, annoyed by the calm, and messaged one of the Sidechicks. "I'm on my way. Prepare yourself. It's about to be sweet." The car rolled out, the estate gates closing behind him with a slow finality that felt, strangely, like punctuation. Kelvin didn't notice. He was too busy congratulating himself. He believed he was walking into pleasure. He didn't realize he was walking out of protection, out of home, out of mercy, out of the last person who had been covering his foolishness with patience. And as the road stretched ahead, Rosemary returned to her tea, staring into the cup the way someone stares into a future they've already chosen, quietly, firmly, without a single tear to entertain anyone. Dubai welcomed Kelvin like a shiny lie, glass buildings, cold air conditioning, and the kind of luxury that makes foolish people feel important. He stepped out of the airport with swagger, acting as if the city had been waiting for him personally. The Sidechicks flanked him like accessories, one in oversized sunglasses even indoors, another filming everything for content, and the third laughing too loudly at jokes Kelvin didn't even finish. They checked into a tall hotel, with a lobby that smelled like expensive perfume and silent judgment. Kelvin kept lifting his chin like a man being inspected and approved. He posted a story immediately, hotel chandelier above, his wristwatch below, captioned with a simple wicked line, "Work mode." He refreshed his notifications, expecting Rosemary to bite. Nothing. He refreshed again. Still nothing. It was strange, like throwing stones into a river and hearing no splash. Kelvin told himself she was crying quietly. That thought soothed his ego the way lullabies soothe babies. The first night was full of staged happiness. They ordered room service, like royalty who didn't know the difference between rich and reckless. Kelvin laughed with his full chest, the kind of laugh he used when he wanted women to think he was generous. He took pictures with the Sidechicks where their faces were accidentally close to his, their hands accidentally in frame, and he posted them in intervals, like a man dropping breadcrumbs, for a wife he believed would follow. He kept his phone volume high, hoping Rosemary's call would ring and interrupt the fun, so he could reject it dramatically and prove he was in control. But Rosemary didn't call. Not once. Not even a harmless, hope you arrived safely message that he could twist into jealousy. Kelvin's confidence began to itch. He scratched it with more noise. More posts, more laughter, more alcohol, more promises to the Sidechicks that sounded like love until you listened carefully and realized it was just ego wearing perfume. By the second morning, Kelvin's excitement started to lean into irritation. He sat by the hotel window watching cars move like ants below, and he checked his phone again. Still nothing. One of the Sidechicks, Naya, teased him lightly. "Your madam no day disturb you?" Kelvin smirked and waved it off. "She's trying to form strong," he said, then added, "She'll break soon." The other woman laughed, but it sounded unsure. Kelvin didn't notice the small shift in the room, the way their laughter wasn't as smooth as yesterday, the way a tiny fear was beginning to creep in like air from a poorly sealed window. Kelvin lifted his glass, made a toast, and declared, "To freedom." The women clinked glasses, but somewhere in the back of Kelvin's mind, Rosemary's calm goodbye returned, quiet, firm, almost merciful. He pushed the thought away like an unwanted bill. He came here to enjoy himself, not to think. And in Kelvin's world, thinking was always the first step to admitting you were wrong. On the third day, Kelvin was dressing up for a poolside outing when the knock came, heavy, confident, and completely uninterested in his enjoyment. At first, he thought it was room service. He shouted, "Come in," like a king granting access. But the door didn't open gently. It opened with authority. Two hotel security staff stood beside unfamiliar men in plain clothes with official badges. Their faces were calm in the way only people with power can afford to be calm. Kelvin's smile froze halfway, like a joke that realized it wasn't funny. "Mr. Kelvin Adewale?" one of them asked. Kelvin blinked. "Yes," he said, adjusting his shirt as if fashion could protect him. "We need you to come with us," the man replied. The Sidechicks sat up immediately, their eyes widening. "Is there a problem?" Kelvin asked, laughing lightly, because that was his favorite defense, laughter. The man didn't laugh back. "You will be informed during questioning," he said. They didn't allow Kelvin to finish dressing. They didn't care that he was on vacation. They didn't care that he was important in his own mind. They took him down the hotel corridor like a man being escorted out of a lie. Guests stared. A woman in a robe paused mid-walk, eyes following Kelvin, as if she was watching a documentary titled Men Who Thought They Could Play God. In the lobby, the Sidechicks trailed behind, trying to keep up, whispering questions at Kelvin. "What is it? Did you do something?" Kelvin whispered back, "Relax, it's nothing." But his voice was thinning. At the reception area, one officer requested his passport. Kelvin patted his pockets, then remembered it was in the hotel safe. A staff member accompanied them back to retrieve it, and Kelvin's hands shook as he punched in the code. The passport came out, but instead of being returned, it was held, like a child's toy being taken away for bad behavior. Kelvin's mouth went dry. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "I'm a businessman." The officer nodded, as if Kelvin had just told him the sky was blue. "We will verify," he replied. The Sidechicks were asked to remain in the hotel. Their bracelets, their handbags, their confidence, none of it mattered. One of them tried to argue, tossing her hair like attitude could change a policy. A security guard stepped closer, and suddenly her voice softened. Kelvin was led away, And the last thing he saw was the women's faces, confusion melting into fear. His phone was taken. His pockets were searched. He felt naked, not because of his clothes, but because the one thing he had relied on, control, was now in someone else's hands. Somewhere inside him, a thought pressed hard against his ribs. Rosemary. Not her tears. Not her begging. Her silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean weakness, only decision. Kelvin swallowed, tried to stand tall, and failed. For the first time in a long time, his arrogance didn't fit him anymore. It sat on him like borrowed clothes, too big, too stiff, and suddenly embarrassing. The interrogation room was not dramatic. It wasn't like the movies where people slam tables and shout. It was worse, quiet, bright, clinical. A place designed to make you feel small without raising a voice. Kelvin sat under fluorescent lights that refused to flatter anyone, not even a man who believed he was handsome enough to negotiate his way out of consequences. The officers asked questions that seemed simple until Kelvin realized they were not seeking answers. They were seeking consistency. Travel history, dates, previous visits, names connected to bookings, reasons for certain movements. Kelvin started confidently, speaking fast, smiling too much, sprinkling his words with charm like seasoning. The officer across from him listened without reacting, typing calmly. The way you type when you already have the puzzle and you're just checking where the liar's story doesn't fit. Hours passed. Kelvin's throat grew dry. His jokes died one by one. He asked to call someone. He was told to wait. He mentioned his wife, thinking it might help, like marriage was a certificate of innocence. The officer asked, "What is your wife's name?" "Rosemary," Kelvin answered quickly. The officer nodded and typed again. Kelvin's stomach tightened. He imagined Rosemary at home, crying, as he'd predicted. But the image didn't sit right anymore. Rosemary didn't cry the way Kelvin wanted. Rosemary didn't perform pain for audience. Rosemary's calm had always been disciplined, like someone trained to endure. Kelvin shifted in his chair, suddenly remembering her exact words. "One day I'll respond." Not with noise, with action. The room felt hotter. Kelvin's palms sweated. He began to understand that action could travel farther than tears. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, the Sidechicks were learning how fast luxury becomes a prison when you're not truly in control. They called Kelvin repeatedly, but his phone was off. They argued with hotel staff, demanded explanations, threatened to call their people, only to realize their people were far away, and Dubai did not care about Lagos bravado. The hotel was polite, but firm. Bills were accumulating. Their room keys suddenly felt like handcuffs disguised as plastic cards. They tried to eat less to save money, but hunger doesn't respect pride. The laughter that had followed Kelvin like perfume now disappeared, replaced by sharp whispers and blame. "This is your man," one of them hissed to another. "He said he had everything planned." Another replied bitterly. "Planned what?" "Arrest." Their voices grew tense, their friendship thinning like cheap fabric under stress. For Kelvin, the days became a blur of waiting, questioning, and humiliating uncertainty. He was not jailed like a criminal in movies. He was held in that frustrating middle space where your freedom is not denied loudly, just delayed endlessly. And delayed freedom is its own torture, because hope keeps standing up and sitting down in your chest until it grows tired. Kelvin stared at walls, replayed his trip's beginning, and felt foolish. He had wanted Rosemary's tears to prove he mattered. Instead, he was now the one swallowing panic, the one being watched, the one trapped in silence. He couldn't even post online to maintain his image. He couldn't even call to demand sympathy. He could only sit and realize slowly that the world had shifted, and he might have helped push it. Outside, the city lights still glittered, tourists still smiled, and somewhere in Lagos, Rosemary was not shouting. She was simply moving, like a person who had finally stopped holding a door open for someone determined to leave. The hotel suite that had felt like a trophy on day 1 began to feel like a trap by day 4. At first, the Sidechicks told themselves Kelvin would return in a few hours. Maybe it was a routine check. Maybe it was paperwork. Maybe Dubai just liked to scare tourists for fun. They dressed up anyway, faces beat, perfume sprayed, ready for a rescue that didn't come. By evening, their phones were hot from calling him, and their voices were hoarse from saying the same panic sentence, "He's not picking." The hotel staff remained polite in the way only trained people can be polite, smiling while silently counting every bottle of water they brought. The women started to notice small things. The minibar items were arranged like temptation with price tags, the air conditioning felt colder, and the hallway outside the door seemed longer than before, as if the building itself had stretched to mock them. On the 5th day, the first gentle reminder came. A neatly printed bill slipped under the door like bad news in plain font. Room charges, food, service, deposits that were now insufficient. One of the women, Naya, laughed nervously and said, "It's fine. Kelvin will handle it." But her laugh sounded like someone trying to whistle in the dark. When she went downstairs to sort it out, the receptionist's smile stayed, but the words didn't soften. "Your account needs to be settled." The Sidechicks returned upstairs with their pride bruised and their confidence wobbling. Another tried to call her friend back home for help, but the friend's voice suddenly became very busy and very unavailable. It was amazing how loyalty disappears the moment money shows up at the door holding a calculator. By night, they began to fight, not the dramatic fighting that ends in breakup speeches, but the tired, hungry kind that happens when fear is sharing a room with ego. One accused the other of eating too much room service. Another swore she hadn't touched the minibar, even though the can of soda was missing like a witness who ran away. They stopped calling Kelvin as "my man" and started calling him that man. They began to whisper a new word with sharp mouths, abandonment. And somewhere in the quiet between their arguments, a truth crept in. Kelvin wasn't just detained. Their fantasy was detained too. Kelvin's days became a slow torture made of polite delays. Nobody shouted at him. Nobody slapped him. Nobody even insulted him. They simply kept him waiting, question, pause, cross-check, wait again, until his confidence began to peel off him like cheap paint and heat. The officers spoke calmly, asked for timelines, requested confirmations, and watched his reactions the way a tailor watches cloth. Carefully, silently, measuring where the story doesn't fit. Kelvin kept trying to charm his way out. "Olga, you know how business is. It's a misunderstanding. I'm a married man." As if marriage was a passport stamp. The officer would nod, type, and say, "We will verify." That sentence started sounding like a drumbeat in Kelvin's head. The worst part wasn't the questions. It was the silence from home. Kelvin expected Rosemary to call, at least to ask if he was okay, even if she was angry. He expected the familiar tug of her worry. But his phone remained out of reach, and even when he got a brief chance to send a message through an official channel, the reply never came. He pictured Rosemary in Lagos, calm, sipping tea, moving around with that quiet decisiveness he had always mistaken for weakness. For the first time, he realized her calm was not passive. It was trained. It was the calm of a person who had watched enough, endured enough, and finally decided that peace was not something you beg for, it's something you choose. Outside the detention process, time was also chewing up his travel stay like a goat chewing paper, steady, careless, unstoppable. Each day that passed reduced his options, tightened the rope of embarrassment, and made his vacation look like a public disgrace. He imagined the Sidechicks waiting at the hotel, still expecting him to pay bills and fix everything. A ridiculous thought hit him and almost made him laugh. Kelvin had traveled to enjoy himself, but he was now the one being handled, like luggage at baggage. Claim, moved, searched, tagged, and stored. And somewhere deep inside, a dread began to grow. This was not random. Somebody had aimed this at him. Calmly. By the time Kelvin's case dragged into his second week, the hotel had quietly changed its attitude. The Sidechicks noticed it first in the small things. The way security began to linger near their corridor. The way staff stopped laughing at their jokes. The way Madam suddenly became Mississippi, they could still move around the lobby. But every step came with eyes tracking them. Gentle, firm eyes that said, "You can walk, but you cannot run." The women tried to check out of the hotel to find something cheaper, but the receptionist's tone stayed smooth while the message hit like a slap. "Your outstanding balance must be cleared before departure." One of them raised her voice. Another cried. The manager didn't change expression. Money is a language, and they had run out of vocabulary. Their relationship with each other collapsed the way cheap heels collapse after one long walk, quietly and painfully. They started blaming Kelvin with full chest now. He said he had funds. He said everything was sordid. He said his wife was just bluffing. The last line tasted bitter when spoken aloud. Rosemary, the woman they had mocked as too calm, was now looking like a quiet storm in their minds. The Sidechicks began making calls home, begging for transfers, but their families asked too many questions. Some friends refused. Some promised and disappeared. Shame sat with them in the room, like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. Then came the final humiliation. Hotel security informed them, politely, like someone offering water, that until their bills were settled, they would remain under strict supervision. It wasn't handcuffs, but it was close enough to feel like one. Suddenly, the same luxury curtains they had admired now looked like prison bars made of fabric. One of them paced and muttered, "Kelvin will fix it." Another laughed sharply and replied, "Kelvin is fixing himself first." That sentence hung in the air, heavy and true. And in that moment, the women realized something terrifying. When Kelvin finally got free, he might not come back for them at all. Some men are loyal to pleasure until trouble arrives. Then they become loyal to survival. On the 14th day, Kelvin was finally called into a room that smelled faintly of paper and final decisions. The officer's tone was neutral, almost bored, as he explained that the investigation had reached a conclusion. Kelvin's records had been reviewed, inconsistencies clarified, and while the experience would leave a mark on his travel history, he was cleared to leave. The word cleared landed like rain after drought. Kelvin nodded too quickly, thanked too much, and stood up with the desperate gratitude of a man who had been holding his breath for days. His passport was returned to him, not ceremoniously, not kindly, just slid across the table. "You will depart immediately," the officer said. "Do not delay." Kelvin agreed before the sentence finished. Freedom, he had learned, does not ask for pride. As he stepped outside, relief rushed through him so fast it almost made him dizzy. His first instinct was to call the Sidechicks, to announce the good news like a hero returning from battle. But when he asked about them, the answer came calmly and without emotion. They were not cleared. Outstanding hotel bills. Unresolved liabilities. No exit authorization. Kelvin felt the relief in his chest shrink slightly, like a balloon meeting a needle. "So, what happens to them?" he asked. The officer shrugged lightly. "They remain until their matters are settled." That was it. No drama. No sympathy. Just procedure. Kelvin nodded again, but this time slower. For the first time, a selfish calculation formed in his mind, quiet, practical, shameful. If he delayed, he could lose his own clearance. If he stayed, he could be dragged back into complications. The truth sat heavy. Survival had presented him with a choice, and survival rarely comes with room for loyalty. That night, Kelvin packed alone. No laughter. No perfumes mixing in the air. Just the sound of zippers and his own breathing. He didn't tell the Sidechicks he was leaving immediately. He told himself he would explain later, after he was safe. It sounded reasonable in his head, the way excuses always do when fear is holding the pen. The airport lights were too bright for Kelvin's mood. As he wheeled his suitcase toward the departure gate, every step felt like both escape and betrayal. His phone buzzed repeatedly, missed calls from the Sidechicks, messages piling up with confusion turning into anger. "Where are you?" "They say we can't leave." "Kelvin, answer me now." He stared at the screen and then did something that would haunt him later. He silenced it. Not blocked. Not deleted. Just silenced, like pushing a crying child into another room because the noise is inconvenient. Kelvin told himself he would fix things once he landed. He told himself many things. At the boarding counter, the final insult unfolded quietly. As Kelvin presented his passport, one of the Sidechicks appeared at the far end of the hall, breathless, arguing with airport staff. She saw him. Their eyes met across the polished floor. For a moment, Kelvin considered walking over, saying something brave, something responsible. But the line moved. The attendant looked at him expectantly. Kelvin stepped forward. Behind him, voices rose, hers sharp with panic, the staff calm and unyielding. "Sir, you can proceed," the attendant said. Kelvin proceeded. Just like that. From behind security glass, the Sidechicks watched him disappear into the crowd of passengers who still believed their lives were intact. One screamed his name. Another cursed him with words too heavy to repeat. Kelvin did not look back. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself it wasn't his fault. But deep down, a quieter truth settled. When trouble arrived, Kelvin had chosen himself without hesitation. The flight took off smoothly, carrying him away from the chaos he had created, leaving others grounded in the mess he refused to clean. Back at the hotel, the Sidechicks received confirmation that tasted like ash. Kelvin had left. No farewell. No explanation. Just absence. The hotel manager delivered the news with professional politeness, as if announcing a weather update. "Your companion has departed," he said. "Your accounts remain outstanding." The words sank slowly, then all at once. One of the women laughed, a sharp, broken sound, while another collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling like it might offer answers. The fantasy finally died, and it died loudly inside their chests. Kelvin was gone, and with him went the illusion of protection. Anger replaced panic. They blamed him for everything now, without softness. For the lies. For the promises. For convincing them that disrespecting another woman's marriage had no price. They replayed his jokes, his confidence, the way he dismissed his wife as too calm, and the irony burned. Rosemary's calm had not trapped them, but Kelvin's arrogance had. Calls were made again, this time to families, to friends, to anyone who might help. Some voices scolded them. Some refused outright. A few promised to see what they could do, which felt like another polite way of saying, "Don't hold your breath." As night fell, the hotel room felt smaller than ever. The curtains no longer looked luxurious. They looked like boundaries. Security outside the door remained visible, not threatening, just present, an unspoken reminder that freedom is expensive. One of the women muttered, "He will regret this." Another replied bitterly, "Men like him only regret when it's too late." And in that locked-in silence, as resentment settled like dust, they all understood the same painful truth. Kelvin had escaped the fire, but he had left them to burn. And somewhere far away, the woman he thought would cry was already gone, quietly winning without ever raising her voice. Kelvin arrived home with the stiff confidence of a man pretending everything was still intact. The car dropped him at the gate he knew by heart, yet the gate did not open. He tried again. Nothing. The security guard peered from the booth with a stranger's caution. "Who are you here to see?" the guard asked. Kelvin laughed, a brittle sound. "My house," he said. The guard checked a tablet, then shook his head. "Sir, this property was vacated weeks ago." The words thudded into Kelvin's chest. Weeks. Not days. Weeks. He insisted, raised his voice, mentioned names, demanded calls. The guard remained calm, repeating the same sentence with the patience reserved for people who mistake volume for authority. Inside the compound, the house looked familiar only in shape. The curtains were gone, the plants trimmed into unfamiliar neatness. When the door finally opened, after a call, after a check, Kelvin stepped into a hollowed memory. No couch, no television, no photographs smiling from frames like proof of a life lived. The walls were clean in a way that felt surgical. Rosemary had not left in anger. She had left with intention. Even the air felt different, as though it had been aired out to forget him. Kelvin stood there, stunned, his suitcase still in hand, the silence louder than any argument they had ever had. He searched for a note, a clue, a single sentence he could argue with. There was none. That absence hurt the most. No insults to fuel rage. No explanations to negotiate. Just emptiness that refused to apologize. Kelvin sat on the floor and laughed once, then stopped. For the first time, the house did not recognize him, and neither did he. Night fell quickly, and with it came the humiliation Kelvin had never prepared for: homelessness. He tried friends first, the loud ones, the my brother ones, only to hear careful voices, suddenly busy. One promised to call back and never did. Another suggested a hotel for now. Family members offered advice instead of beds. Kelvin drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring like accusations. He parked, slept in the car for an hour, woke sweating, and checked his phone as if Rosemary might materialize with directions back to his old life. She didn't. By morning, the frustration turned sharp. Kelvin cursed the guards, the house, the silence, the trip, everyone but himself. He replayed Rosemary's warnings and mocked them aloud, trying to punch holes in her calm with his voice. It didn't work. He showered at a cheap place, changed clothes in the car, and stared at his reflection, noticing how quickly arrogance evaporates when comfort disappears. Hunger came next, then anger again. He told himself Rosemary had overreacted. He told himself he would fix it. He told himself lies that felt thinner each time he repeated them. As evening approached, Kelvin realized something terrifying. He was unmoored. No address. No welcome. No woman waiting with crossed arms and soft forgiveness. The city moved around him, indifferent. Somewhere between the traffic and the dusk, Kelvin understood that punishment doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with nowhere to sit. Messages from abroad began to pile up, pleas at first, then threats, then insults. The Sidechicks had found ways to reach him through borrowed phones and hotel lines. They won't let us leave. You promised. Fix this. Kelvin read them once and felt the familiar urge to run. He typed a reply, erased it, typed again, erased again. Then he did what he had perfected over the years. He went quiet. Silence had always been his escape. This time, it was also his confession. From detention, the women's patience collapsed. One accused him publicly in messages forwarded through mutuals. Another begged him to send money he didn't have. The last stopped writing altogether, which felt worse than anger. Kelvin blocked numbers one by one, telling himself it was temporary, telling himself he needed space. In truth, he was ashamed, and fear makes cowards efficient. Each block felt like closing a door he had opened recklessly. As the night deepened, Kelvin sat alone in his car again, phone dark, chest tight. The women he had flaunted were locked away. The wife he had dismissed had vanished. And the life he had assumed was permanent had proven how quickly it could be packed up and removed. For the first time, Kelvin did not feel unlucky. He felt exposed, seen by consequences that did not need to shout to be heard. Kelvin's days blurred into a pattern he hated: wake up tired, wander aimlessly, sit somewhere pretending to be busy, then return to the car or a borrowed couch when night fell. Sleep avoided him like an old debt collector. When it came, it arrived in short, mocking bursts filled with half-dreams of airport halls, hotel corridors, and Rosemary's calm face looking at him like she already knew the ending. He snapped easily now. Small inconveniences felt personal. A traffic jam became an insult. A stranger's stare felt like judgment. He argued with people who didn't know him and replayed conversations that no longer existed. His mind, once loud with confidence, was now loud with regret, and regret is a noisier roommate than pride. What haunted him most were not the Sidechicks or the detention, but the simplicity of Rosemary's warnings. No threats. No drama. Just statements delivered like facts. If you go, don't expect the same life. Kelvin had heard them and laughed, convinced that love was elastic and forgiveness automatic. Now those words followed him everywhere, on buses, in queues, in the quiet moments when there was nothing left to distract him. He found himself whispering responses to her warnings, as if arguing could still change the past. But the past remained unmoved, sitting solidly behind him like a locked door. One afternoon, Kelvin caught his reflection in a shop window and didn't recognize the man staring back. The shoulders were lower. The eyes looked hunted. For the first time, he felt something close to fear, not of punishment, but of permanence. What if this wasn't a phase? What if Rosemary's silence wasn't a tactic, but an ending? The thought cracked something open inside him, And Kelvin realized he had not just lost a wife. He had lost the person who believed in a version of him he no longer deserved. The realization didn't arrive dramatically. It came quietly, on an ordinary afternoon, when Kelvin overheard two women at a cafe discussing a friend who had left without fighting. One of them laughed and said, "That's the scariest type." Kelvin froze, cup halfway to his mouth. The words sank deeper than any insult he had received in weeks. He finally understood what he had misread all along. Rosemary's calm had never been surrender. It had been preparation. While he was enjoying attention and noise, she had been planning distance and dignity. He replayed their marriage from this new angle and saw things he had ignored. Rosemary's silence after arguments. Her habit of taking notes, actual notes, about expenses, dates, movements. The way she stopped asking questions near the end, stopped checking his phone, stopped caring where he was at night. He had taken that as victory. Now it looked like closure. Rosemary hadn't snapped. She hadn't broken. She had simply reached the end of her patience and stepped off the road before it swallowed her completely. Kelvin laughed bitterly at himself. He had thought strength was loud, commanding rooms, traveling freely, being admired. Rosemary had shown him a different kind. The strength to leave without announcement, to start over without applause, to choose peace without witnesses. The truth settled heavily, but clearly. This was not revenge. This was consequence. And it was permanent. No one could tell Kelvin where Rosemary was. And that was the point. Friends spoke carefully. Relatives shrugged honestly. And neighbors only knew she had moved on. She had sold, donated, or discarded everything that tied her to her old life, leaving no emotional breadcrumbs behind. Kelvin imagined her waking up somewhere new, breathing easier, moving through her days without checking the time or waiting for apologies. The image hurt, but it also made sense. Rosemary had not run away. She had relocated, mentally first, then physically. Clues surfaced quietly. A closed account here. A forwarded mail there. A name removed from a contact list. Rosemary had erased herself from his routines the way a careful editor removes unnecessary words. No mess. No smudges. Kelvin realized that even if he found her location, he no longer had permission. Access had been revoked, not by law, but by choice. And choice, unlike emotion, does not argue back. As evening settled, Kelvin sat alone, the city humming around him, and accepted what he had been avoiding. Rosemary was not coming back. Not to shout. Not to explain. Not to forgive. Her silence was not empty. It was full of decision. And for the first time since this all began, Kelvin understood the depth of his loss. He had underestimated a woman who chose herself. And that choice had changed everything. The message came on an ordinary evening, which somehow made it worse. Kelvin was sitting alone on a public bench, watching people hurry past with purpose, when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. For a moment, he ignored it. Hope had embarrassed him too many times already. But something in his chest tightened, the way it does when instinct speaks before logic. He opened it. There were no emojis, no anger, no explanation, just 4 short lines that carried the weight of a verdict. Kelvin read them again and again, as if repetition might reveal a hidden doorway back to his old life. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, desperate to type something, anything, but the screen remained still. What could he say that hadn't already expired? An apology now would sound like noise. A promise would sound like a joke. Rosemary had not written to start a conversation. She had written to end one. Around him, the world continued its small, indifferent movements, a vendor calling out prices, a couple laughing softly, a bus honking impatiently. Kelvin felt strangely detached, like a man watching life through glass. The message did not make him angry. It made him tired. Tired in a way that sleep could not fix. Rosemary's words were not cruel. They were clean. And clean endings, he realized, leave no room to hide. Weeks later, Kelvin settled into a reduced version of life, one that required fewer explanations because fewer people asked questions. He moved into a small, temporary space that never quite felt like home. There were no photographs on the walls, no shared routines, no waiting. Just days that passed and nights that arrived on schedule, indifferent to his regrets. Occasionally, he would catch himself reaching for his phone to share a joke or complain about traffic. Then remember there was no one left to receive those pieces of him. The stories from abroad eventually reached him, whispers of court dates, unpaid balances, consequences that refused to dissolve. He did not feel victorious. He did not feel avenged. He felt hollowed out, like someone who had finally learned that escaping a fire does not make you innocent if you lit the match. The Sidechicks were gone from his life, the noise gone with them. What remained was the echo of Rosemary's absence, a quiet that demanded accountability instead of pity. Kelvin often replayed the beginning, wondering which moment could have been different. But the truth had settled. Nothing had happened suddenly. He had been warned carefully, consistently, lovingly. He just didn't believe silence could be stronger than shouting. Now he knew. Rosemary had not destroyed him. She had simply stopped saving him. And in that stillness, Kelvin was left with the hardest lesson of all, that some losses do not come with second chances, only understanding that arrives far too late. Please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.